Remove your truck from here. It's a no parking.
It's an emergency.
I don't care.
The street had been quiet in that lazy, predictable way suburban mornings usually are, the kind where nothing louder than a lawn sprinkler ever interrupts the air. A couple of garage doors were half open, someone's dog barked once and gave up, and the whole block looked frozen in routine. That calm shattered the second sirens cut through it, sharp and urgent, bouncing off houses and snapping everyone's attention in the same direction. Curtains twitched. Front doors cracked open. Whatever peace the neighborhood had been enjoying vanished instantly. A fire truck barreled down the street with lights blazing, red and white strobes flashing against parked cars and trimmed hedges. It slowed hard near one house, brakes hissing, engine rumbling with purpose. Smoke curled faintly above the roofline, not thick yet, but enough to make the situation unmistakably real. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't precautionary. This was an active emergency unfolding in real time. Neighbors poured out onto sidewalks and driveways, some in slippers, some clutching phones, others still half-dressed. Nobody rushed forward. Everyone knew better. They kept distance, watching with wide eyes as firefighters jumped down from the truck and moved with fast, practiced coordination. A hose hit the pavement with a heavy thud. Another firefighter checked equipment. Commands were exchanged in clipped phrases that carried urgency without panic. The fire truck stopped where it needed to, angled slightly, occupying more curb than usual, its size impossible to miss. That alone told the story. When a fire engine parks like that, it's not asking permission. It's there because it has to be. The narrator clocks it immediately. This is an emergency scene. Lives, property, and safety are on the line. Rules about curb alignment and aesthetic order don't exist here. That's when the woman appeared at the edge of the frame, standing just far enough away to seem involved without actually helping. She wore a sharp HOA-style blazer, clean and bright, completely out of sync with the chaos around her. In her hand was a clipboard, held tight against her side like it was armor. She didn't rush. She didn't ask questions. She just stood there watching the truck, eyes narrowed, posture stiff. At first, she blended in with the crowd. People assumed she was just another neighbor reacting to the sirens. But while everyone else watched the firefighters, she watched the truck itself. Her gaze traced its wheels, the angle it rested at, how close it sat to the curb. She shifted her weight, took a step closer, then another, positioning herself like she was inspecting something instead of witnessing an emergency. The narrator clocks her instantly too. She has zero authority here. None. Not during a fire. Not during a response. Not ever. The uniformed firefighters had jurisdiction. The flashing lights alone made that crystal clear. Yet she stood there with that clipboard like she was about to audit a disaster. Smoke drifted a little thicker now, enough for murmurs to ripple through the onlookers. Someone whispered that they hoped everyone was okay. Another neighbor raised a phone higher, recording from a safe distance. The fire crew didn't slow down. They moved around the truck, around each other, working with focus that ignored everything unnecessary. Including her. She didn't ignore them back. She stepped closer to the curb, heels clicking on the pavement, eyes locked on where the truck sat. She tilted her head, lips pursed, like something about the positioning annoyed her. She glanced up at a nearby street sign, then back down at the tire, mentally measuring space no one else cared about. The clipboard came up slightly, her thumb sliding along its edge. From a distance, she could have been mistaken for someone official. That's how this stuff always starts. A blazer. A clipboard. Confidence. In a normal situation, people hesitate to challenge that combo. But this wasn't normal. This was sirens and smoke and fire gear. Everyone else knew it. Somehow she didn't. She took another step forward, crossing from spectator to participant without invitation. A firefighter walked past her carrying equipment, not even acknowledging her presence. She watched him go, frowned, and looked back at the truck again, clearly bothered. The narrator doesn't need inner dialogue here. Her body language said enough. She wasn't thinking about safety. She was thinking about compliance. Neighbors noticed her now. A couple exchanged looks, eyebrows raised, silently asking if she was seriously about to do what it looked like she was about to do. Someone muttered, "You gotta be kidding me," under their breath. Still no one stopped her. Shock has a way of freezing people for a beat. She shifted the clipboard fully into her hands and glanced down at it, pen already tucked into the metal clip. She scanned the street again, not for danger, but for alignment. The truck's engine rumbled, lights pulsing, hoses stretched toward the house. Smoke drifted lazily upward, a warning sign nobody ignored except her. She stepped closer to the front wheel, squinting like she'd found a problem worth addressing. The pen clicked once, sharp and loud against the background noise. A firefighter glanced in her direction briefly, confused, then went back to work. She didn't notice the look. Or she did and didn't care. The narrator clocks the moment clearly. This is where things go sideways. Not because of fire, but because someone with pretend power decided real authority didn't apply to her. And that's when she decided the fire truck was out of compliance. She waited until one of the firefighters paused near the side of the truck, adjusting his gloves before heading back toward the house. She didn't rush him or wave her arms. She approached with a careful smile, stepping into his peripheral vision like she was asking for directions instead of interrupting an emergency response. Her tone stayed polite, almost friendly, the kind people use when they think manners will smooth over anything. She cleared her throat lightly to announce herself without sounding demanding. She told him she just needed a quick moment. The firefighter glanced at her, distracted but not hostile, clearly assuming she'd say something reasonable. She gestured toward the truck and explained, calmly, that it was parked in violation of HOA parking rules. She said it like it was obvious, like this was information he'd appreciate knowing. No accusation, no raised voice, just a matter-of-fact delivery that felt wildly misplaced given the smoke drifting behind him. She used the kind of language she was clearly comfortable with, phrases polished by repetition. She mentioned designated zones and how emergency vehicles were supposed to respect clear curbs whenever possible. She talked about community order like it was a shared responsibility, nodding as she spoke, confident he'd understand her point. The words sounded official enough to someone not paying attention, but in this context they landed like static. The firefighter didn't respond right away. He didn't argue or acknowledge her claim. He simply turned back toward the truck, grabbed a piece of equipment, and moved on like she hadn't spoken at all. It wasn't intentional disrespect. It was triage. Fires don't wait for parking debates. To him she was background noise. That lack of reaction seemed to catch her off guard. She stood there for a second, smile frozen, then followed him a step or two as if expecting him to circle back. When he didn't, she tried again, this time clarifying that the truck was blocking an HOA-designated curb area and disrupting the intended flow of the street. She emphasized that these standards existed for a reason, that order mattered even during unusual situations. He didn't stop. He didn't turn around. Another firefighter crossed between them, hose slung over his shoulder, completely ignoring her presence. The sound of radios crackling and boots moving drowned out her voice. She wasn't being rude. She was being irrelevant. Neighbors nearby watched this exchange with visible confusion. A woman in a hoodie tilted her head, trying to process what she was hearing. A guy leaned closer to his friend and whispered something under his breath, eyes wide. Nobody stepped in yet. The situation was so absurd it didn't feel real. People were still giving it a second, wondering if they'd misunderstood her. Karen didn't back off. She repositioned herself slightly, making sure she had a clear view of the truck again. She gestured toward the curb, pointing out how far the tire extended past where she thought it should be. She mentioned clear curbs again, repeating the phrase like it carried legal authority. Her tone stayed controlled, but the insistence crept in, subtle and sharp. The firefighters continued to ignore her. One walked past carrying a ladder. Another adjusted the hose connection. None of them engaged. From their perspective, there was nothing to discuss. The emergency dictated their actions, not HOA guidelines. The gap between her expectations and reality widened with every second. Neighbors remained quiet, mostly because nobody wanted to escalate anything during a fire. They weren't on her side, but they weren't ready to challenge her either. It was that awkward middle ground where people wait to see how something plays out before committing. Phones hovered at chest level now, recording without being obvious. The disbelief was spreading. Karen's expression tightened. The polite smile faded into something flatter, more annoyed. She glanced down at her clipboard like it might remind her what to do next. The pen came out smoothly like muscle memory kicked in. She flipped the clipboard open and rested it against her forearm, eyes flicking between the truck and the paper. She started writing. Not scribbling random notes, but deliberate marks, straight lines, organized sections. Anyone close enough could see the intent behind it. This wasn't casual observation. This was documentation. The pen scratched loudly, the sound oddly sharp against the hum of the engine and the hiss of water nearby. That changed the energy. Writing made it feel real in a way talking hadn't. Neighbors exchanged looks again, this time more uneasy. One person whispered, "Is she serious?" Another shook their head slowly. The firefighters still didn't react, but the crowd did. Documentation implied consequences, even if nobody knew what those were supposed to be. Karen leaned slightly closer to the truck as she wrote, checking something off, then adding another note. She nodded to herself like she was confirming a finding. Her confidence grew with each line she filled. Being ignored didn't slow her down. If anything, it fueled her. She clicked the pen, paused, then added more. She glanced up once, saw the firefighters still working, and frowned like they were the ones being unreasonable. The clipboard snapped shut for a second, then opened again, like she couldn't decide whether she was finished. She adjusted her stance, planted her feet, and continued. Neighbors stayed confused but quiet, watching her create a paper trail no one had asked for. The emergency response rolled on, completely unaffected by her notes, and that contrast made the situation feel even more surreal. Sirens still flashed. Smoke still drifted. And there she was, documenting curb placement like it mattered. But she didn't stop there. She lifted her head from the clipboard with a sharp inhale, like she'd just confirmed something important, and pointed toward the front of the fire truck. Her voice cut through the noise now, not loud enough to scream, but loud enough to demand attention. She said the truck was blocking access and creating an obstruction that needed to be addressed immediately. The confidence in her delivery made it sound like she was issuing a correction, not interrupting an emergency. One firefighter paused, clearly surprised anyone would even say that out loud. She took that moment as an opening and kept going, explaining that emergency access routes had to remain clear and that the current positioning interfered with proper flow. The irony was almost painful. A thick hose already snaked from the truck across the pavement toward the house, charged and pulsing, making it obvious the truck wasn't going anywhere. Smoke rolled lazily from a window above, faint but steady, the kind that tells you things are actively happening inside. She gestured toward the curb, then toward the street, mapping out an imaginary solution with her hands. She said they needed to reposition, maybe pull forward or angle differently so the street could remain compliant. She spoke like she was rearranging lawn furniture instead of directing a firefighting operation. The firefighters stared at her for half a second longer this time, disbelief flickering across their faces, then went right back to work. That dismissal only irritated her further. She stepped closer, careful not to cross the hose but close enough to make her presence unavoidable. She repeated that the truck was blocking access, emphasizing the word blocking like it was a charge. One firefighter finally looked at her fully and told her they were actively responding and needed space. His tone was controlled, professional, and final. She didn't like that at all. She snapped back that community safety didn't stop during emergencies and that rules existed for a reason. Her voice grew sharper, the polite edges from earlier gone completely. She talked over the sound of radios and water pressure, determined to be heard. Neighbors who'd been lingering quietly now leaned in, eyes wide, phones lifting higher without shame. This wasn't background weirdness anymore. This was a show. The hose jerked slightly as water surged through it, a visual reminder that things were escalating inside the house. Smoke thickened just enough to catch everyone's attention. A neighbor covered her mouth, concern written all over her face. Meanwhile, Karen waved at the truck again, insisting it was compromising access for other vehicles, as if a line of fire engines was about to show up and need her guidance. A firefighter told her firmly to step back. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about lack of cooperation. She claimed she was trying to help and that ignoring standards would only cause more problems. The entitlement in her voice was unmistakable now. This wasn't confusion. This was control. Phones were fully out now. No one bothered pretending otherwise. Screens glowed as people recorded from driveways and sidewalks, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Someone whispered, "This lady's nuts." Another shook his head and laughed once, then stopped when the situation didn't feel funny anymore. The firefighters focused harder, clearly choosing the fire over the nonsense, but the tension hung thick. Karen flipped her clipboard open again and announced she would be documenting noncompliance if the truck wasn't moved. She said it loudly enough for multiple people to hear, tapping the paper for emphasis. The phrase noncompliance sounded ridiculous in this context, and that was exactly why it landed so hard. She wasn't just complaining. She was threatening consequences, even if nobody knew what those were supposed to be. She started writing again, faster this time, pen scratching aggressively. She narrated parts of it out loud, mentioning blocked access and failure to adjust positioning. It was like she wanted the firefighters to know exactly what she was recording. One of them shot her a look that could have melted steel but still didn't engage. The work came first. Neighbors exchanged looks that said everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This woman genuinely believed she outranked an emergency response. The realization spread fast, moving through the crowd like a ripple. People stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. The vibe shifted from confusion to disbelief. She pointed again at the truck and said this would reflect poorly later. She didn't specify on whom. She didn't have to. The threat was implied. Her shoulders squared, posture rigid, like she'd settled into the role she thought she owned. Smoke continued to drift upward, sirens still pulsing, hoses still deployed, and yet her focus never wavered from compliance. A firefighter finally told her, louder this time, to move back for safety. She scoffed and said safety was exactly why she was there. The audacity drew a couple gasps from the crowd. Someone muttered, "No way she just said that." Another neighbor shook their head and whispered, "This is unreal." Karen didn't care. She added another line to the clipboard, then snapped it shut with a decisive clap. She looked around like she expected applause or agreement. She got neither. Instead, she got silence, heavy and judgmental. The kind that makes it clear everyone's watching and nobody's on your side. That's when people realized she wasn't joking. She stopped pretending this was a suggestion and started acting like she was directing traffic on her own block. Standing near the front of the truck, she lifted her arm and motioned forward, palm down, signaling where she thought the vehicle should move. The gesture was sharp and authoritative, like she expected immediate compliance. It was surreal watching someone try to choreograph a fire response with the confidence of a crossing guard and the entitlement of a board meeting. A firefighter carrying equipment nearly walked into her because she stepped into his path mid-stride. He swerved around her without slowing, jaw tight, eyes locked on the house. She didn't apologize. Instead, she pointed again, insisting the truck needed to reposition to maintain curb clearance. Her voice cut through the noise just enough to be heard, and that alone felt wrong. Emergencies have their own rhythm and she was disrupting it on purpose. She paced alongside the truck, waving her arm like she was mapping out an alternate parking plan. She said they should pull forward a few feet, maybe angled differently because the current setup wasn't compliant. The hose stretched taut across the street, water pulsing through it, making any movement impossible. That reality didn't register with her. Logic wasn't invited into this moment. She interrupted a firefighter mid-radio call, talking over him while he tried to relay information. He turned his body slightly, shielding the radio, and told her again to step back. She shot back that HOA rules didn't disappear just because there was an emergency. She actually said that out loud like it was a reasonable position. A couple neighbors gasped. Someone muttered, "You gotta be kidding me," under their breath. The claim landed heavy. HOA rules still apply in emergencies. That was her hill and she climbed it proudly. She said order mattered most when things got chaotic, that standards existed to prevent situations from getting worse. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Everything she touched became more complicated, more tense, more unsafe. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably now, no longer just watching but visibly disturbed. A woman hugged her arms tight against her chest, eyes darting between the smoke and the clipboard. A man stepped back toward his driveway, shaking his head slowly like he didn't want to be associated with any of this. Phone stayed up, recording steadily, capturing a moment nobody would have believed without proof. Karen kept gesturing, correcting imaginary problems while real ones burned behind her. She told firefighters they were crowding the street, ignoring the fact that they were the only reason the situation wasn't spiraling. She pointed at the curb again, tapping her clipboard for emphasis, like the pavement itself was breaking some sacred rule. Her voice sharpened with every sentence. Sirens continued to pulse, radios crackled with updates, and she raised her voice to compete with them. Not shouting yet, but loud enough to push through the noise. She said she needed them to listen. She said they were refusing to cooperate. She said this was unacceptable behavior for the neighborhood. The entitlement was off the charts. A firefighter finally snapped back that they were in the middle of an active response and she needed to move. She scoffed, rolling her eyes, and said professionalism went both ways. That comment sucked the air out of the crowd. People stared openly now, no effort to hide their reactions. Disbelief turned into anger. She stepped even closer to the truck, pointing at the wheel again, repeating that it was improperly placed. The hose shifted slightly as someone adjusted pressure, and she flinched, then complained that the movement proved her point about safety. She twisted every moment into justification, no matter how absurd. Her voice rose again, louder than before, cutting over the sirens and radios. She announced that this scene was being mishandled and that she would escalate the issue. The word escalate echoed, ridiculous and threatening at the same time. Neighbors winced. Someone whispered, "This is insane." Another shook their head and laughed once, then went quiet when nobody joined in. Firefighters stopped glancing at her entirely, focusing harder on their work like she was static they couldn't afford to tune into. That only made her louder. She repeated that HOA regulations applied at all times, emergencies included. She said it like a mantra, daring someone to challenge her directly. The crowd's discomfort turned into something heavier. This wasn't just awkward anymore. It was dangerous. She was distracting responders, inserting herself into a process she didn't understand and refusing to back down. People felt it. You could see it in the way bodies leaned away from her, in the way conversations stopped altogether. She raised her voice one more time, sharp and commanding, demanding the truck be moved immediately. That was the moment the noise shifted. Not from her but from behind the truck, where someone had finally stopped what they were doing and turned. And that's when the fire captain noticed. She squared her shoulders like she was about to deliver a closing statement nobody had asked for, lifting the clipboard higher as if it somehow legitimized what she was about to say next. Her voice steadied, dropping into that tone people use when they think they're about to sound important. She announced, clearly and without hesitation, that she would be reporting the fire department for how this scene was being handled. The words landed wrong immediately, hanging in the air like smoke that didn't belong there. A couple of firefighters actually stopped moving for a second. Not long, just enough to register what she'd said. One of them blinked, looking over at another like he needed confirmation he'd heard her right. Reporting the fire department. During an active response. The audacity of it knocked the rhythm out of the moment. Even the neighbors seemed stunned into silence. She kept going, clearly encouraged by the brief pause. She started talking about liability, drawing the word out like it was a loaded weapon. She said improper positioning could cause property damage, that hoses across the street increased risk, and that blocked access would reflect badly if anything went wrong. None of it made sense in context, but she stacked the phrases confidently, like volume could replace logic. She claimed she was protecting the neighborhood, stressing that phrase like it was her personal mission statement. She said someone had to think long-term, someone had to care about consequences after the smoke cleared. The irony was brutal. Firefighters were actively preventing damage while she lectured them about hypothetical outcomes. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some shaking their heads, others staring openly now, done pretending this was normal. One firefighter glanced toward the house, then back at her, jaw tight. Another adjusted his grip on the hose, eyes narrowed. They weren't scared. They were stunned. This wasn't something they were trained for, some HOA board member trying to flex authority in the middle of a fire. For a split second, it felt like the scene didn't know how to process her existence. She mistook that stunned silence for leverage. Her confidence spiked. She said she'd already documented multiple concerns and that the department's refusal to cooperate would be included. She didn't explain what that meant or who would care. She didn't need to. In her mind, the threat itself was enough. She tapped the clipboard twice for emphasis, sharp and deliberate. Phones were fully raised now, no attempt at subtlety. Neighbors leaned in, recording from every angle, whispers buzzing through the crowd. Someone muttered, "This is insane," and another replied, "She's really doing this." The firefighters' radios crackled again, pulling them back into the reality of the emergency, but the tension lingered thick. She raised her voice slightly, pushing past the background noise, insisting that the department answer for this later. She said property values mattered. She said the HOA would not overlook negligence. She spoke like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed for years, finally getting her moment to perform it in the wild. Every sentence dug her deeper. A firefighter finally spoke, telling her she needed to step back immediately. His tone was firm, clipped, and professional. She shot back that she had every right to be there as a representative of the neighborhood. That was the line. The final stretch of authority she thought she owned. The claim hung there, bold and baseless. Neighbors reacted instantly. A few gasped. Someone laughed once, short and incredulous, then clamped their mouth shut. The idea that an HOA representative outranked emergency responders during a fire was too absurd to ignore now. Any remaining benefit of the doubt evaporated on the spot. The firefighters didn't move for another beat, not because they were unsure, but because the moment required restraint. They were trained to de-escalate, to focus on the mission, to avoid unnecessary confrontation. That discipline kept them from snapping back, but it didn't hide the shift. Their posture changed. Their attention sharpened. The nonsense had reached its limit. She doubled down anyway, saying she'd ensure this incident was reviewed. She said she'd file complaints, contact leadership, and follow up. The words spilled out faster now, urgency creeping into her voice. For the first time, there was a crack in her composure. Control was slipping and she felt it. Smoke thickened slightly behind her, a visual reminder of why everyone else was there. A neighbor coughed softly. Another stepped farther back, tugging a kid closer. The contrast between real danger and manufactured authority couldn't have been clearer. One was urgent. The other was noise. Karen finished her speech with a stiff nod, like she'd just dropped the mic. She stood there, clipboard clutched tight, waiting for a reaction that never came. No one agreed. No one apologized. No one moved the truck. The firefighters went back to work, deliberately ignoring her now, choosing action over argument. That silence hit harder than any rebuttal. The crowd wasn't confused anymore. They weren't amused either. They were done. Everyone watching understood the same thing at once. Whatever she thought she was, whatever power she imagined she held, it didn't exist here. That's when pretending she mattered stopped being an option. The fire captain stepped forward without any rush, moving through the controlled chaos like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He wasn't loud, wasn't flustered, and didn't look even slightly impressed by the scene unfolding near his truck. His jacket was marked, his helmet tucked under one arm, and his expression stayed neutral in that calm, unshakable way that only comes from experience. The moment people noticed him approaching, the background noise dipped just a little, like everyone instinctively knew this was the adult stepping in. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough to be heard clearly but far enough to keep space. He didn't look angry. He didn't look amused either. He looked focused, eyes steady, posture grounded, the kind of presence that doesn't need theatrics to be effective. He glanced once at the truck, once at the hose, then back at her, taking in the clipboard, the stance, the whole situation in a single sweep. When he spoke, his voice was even and direct, cutting cleanly through the sirens and radio chatter without competing with them. He asked one simple question, nothing fancy, nothing confrontational. He asked if she was involved in the emergency. The phrasing mattered. It wasn't accusatory. It was procedural. Yes or no. Karen straightened instantly, like she'd been waiting for this moment. She answered proudly, chin up, saying she was an HOA board member for the subdivision. She said it like it explained everything, like it was supposed to unlock some hidden respect. A couple of neighbors exchanged looks that said, "Here we go." Phone stayed up, steady, catching every second. The captain nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if acknowledging the answer without validating it. He didn't interrupt her or correct her mid-sentence. He let her finish, then responded just as calmly. He stated that this was an active emergency scene. He didn't dress it up or add drama. He said it like a fact carved into stone, something that didn't bend based on who was standing nearby. He continued, explaining that during an emergency response, the fire department held full authority over the scene. He gestured lightly toward the truck, the hose, the firefighters moving behind him. He said their positioning, access, and operations were determined by safety and response needs, not neighborhood regulations. His tone stayed steady, almost instructional, like he was explaining something obvious that shouldn't need explaining. Then he said it plainly. HOA rules did not apply here. Not during an emergency. Not ever on an active scene. The sentence landed clean and final, no room for interpretation. You could almost feel the crowd exhale again, relief washing through them now that the nonsense had finally met something solid. Karen didn't take it well. Her smile vanished, replaced by a tight expression that mixed disbelief and irritation. She tried to argue that community still had standards, that emergencies didn't excuse ignoring them. She spoke faster now, words stacking on top of each other, reaching for control that was slipping through her fingers. The captain listened without interrupting, eyes locked on her, face unreadable. When she paused for breath, he reiterated that she was interfering with an emergency response and needed to step back. Still calm. Still controlled. Still not raising his voice. That calm seemed to irritate her more than shouting ever could. She pushed back again, saying she was representing residents and had a responsibility to speak up. She gestured toward the houses like they were witnesses backing her claim. The argument felt thinner now, stretched too far. Neighbors didn't nod. They didn't agree. They watched in silence, letting the imbalance speak for itself. The captain's posture shifted slightly, not aggressive, just firmer. He told her that continued interference would not be allowed. He said it wasn't a discussion and wasn't up for debate. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. This wasn't about opinions anymore. It was about authority, and it wasn't hers. Karen scoffed and muttered that this was exactly how things got mishandled. She said she'd make sure this didn't get ignored later. The clipboard came up again, pen poised, like she was clinging to the last symbol of power she had left. A firefighter behind the captain shook his head slightly, disbelief written all over his face. The captain didn't react to the clipboard. He didn't comment on her threats. He simply told her, again, to step away from the scene. This time there was no instructional tone. It was firm, clear, and final. The kind of directive that doesn't get repeated many times. Karen opened her mouth to argue again, words already forming, confidence tipping into defiance. The crowd felt it tighten, that split second where things could tip from absurd into serious. Phones tilted slightly, capturing her reaction, waiting for what came next. She started to speak, ready to push one more time, ready to assert herself again despite everything she'd just been told. Her body language screamed refusal, entitlement, and stubborn pride. She wasn't ready to let it go even now. And that was the mistake. The fire captain's voice stayed calm as he told her to step back from the scene, repeating the instruction once so there was no confusion and no room for argument. He didn't raise it or sharpen it, but the authority behind it was obvious, the kind that comes from experience instead of ego. He positioned himself slightly between her and the truck, not aggressively, just enough to reclaim control of the space. That small movement did more than any shouting ever could. He explained the situation publicly and professionally, not to humiliate her but to reset the reality for everyone watching. He stated clearly that this was an active emergency scene and that safety protocols required space, focus, and cooperation. His words were plain and direct. No fancy language, no legal threats, just facts laid out clean. The explanation wasn't for her benefit alone. It was for the neighbors, the crew, and anyone recording. The effect on the crowd was instant. Shoulders dropped. Breathing slowed. People who had been braced for chaos relaxed like someone finally cut the tension with a knife. Phones lowered slightly, not because the moment wasn't important anymore, but because the outcome was obvious. Real authority had entered and it didn't need to flex. Firefighters went back to work immediately, moving hoses, checking equipment, communicating over radios like the interruption had never happened. The engine continued to rumble, water pressure surged through the lines, and the operation regained its rhythm in seconds. The contrast between trained urgency and manufactured outrage couldn't have been clearer. One was necessary. The other was noise. Karen tried to speak again, opening her mouth like she was about to restart the argument, but the captain stopped her with a single raised hand and a steady look. He ordered her to step back beyond the safety perimeter, stating the instruction clearly so witnesses could hear it. When she hesitated, still gripping the clipboard like a life raft, he repeated the order with finality and motioned to his crew. 2 firefighters moved toward her calmly, not rushing or grabbing, simply positioning themselves to guide her away. The lack of aggression made the moment more serious, not less. It showed this wasn't personal and it wasn't optional. This was procedure. Karen muttered complaints about rights and representation, but nobody engaged with it. The rant had lost its audience. Neighbors watched as she was escorted step by step away from the truck, the scene swallowing its own drama. A few people nodded in approval. Others stayed silent. Relief was universal. Firefighters kept moving, boots splashing lightly, radios chirping, teamwork back in full control. The emergency reclaimed its space. Karen was led farther down the street, still muttering, still convinced, but visibly smaller with every step. Once she crossed the informal boundary, the captain turned back without another glance and refocused the operation. The crowd followed his lead, attention shifting from spectacle to safety. Conversations restarted in low tones, neighbors checking on each other, kids pulled closer, nerves settling. No one chased the argument or demanded apologies. They didn't need to. The outcome spoke loud enough. The fire scene continued, efficient and serious, while the disruption faded into the background like it never belonged there in the first place. But the silence afterward said everything. The fire response rolled forward without missing a beat, like a machine that had shaken off a distraction and locked back into purpose. Firefighters moved with practiced urgency, boots thudding against pavement, radios popping with clipped updates, and the hose stayed charged and steady as water surged through it. The truck remained parked exactly where it needed to be, angled for access, lights flashing in sharp bursts that reflected off nearby houses. Smoke still drifted from the structure, thinner now, but present enough to remind everyone this was real and ongoing. Neighbors hovered at a safe distance, shaken but noticeably calmer now that the chaos had been checked. People spoke in low voices, trading quick updates and relieved looks. A few laughed softly, the kind of nervous laugh that comes when adrenaline finally lets go. Phones dropped back into pockets no longer needed. Kids clung to parents for a moment, then relaxed when they realized the situation wasn't spiraling anymore. The captain moved with quiet confidence, checking in with his crew, nodding once here and there, adjusting positions without raising his voice. No speeches. No show. Just leadership doing its thing. Firefighters responded instantly, resuming their rhythm like nothing had interrupted them in the first place. The earlier nonsense already felt distant, like it belonged to a different block entirely. Inside the response zone, coordination tightened. Tools were swapped, positions adjusted, communication stayed sharp and clean. Outside it, neighbors respected the boundary without being asked twice. The invisible line held because it was backed by real authority and mutual understanding, not a clipboard and ego. The truck didn't budge and nobody questioned it anymore. Karen was completely gone. No pacing. No pointing. No pen clicking. Her absence was loud in the best way possible. The scene felt lighter without her, calmer, safer. It was proof that sometimes the fastest way to restore order is simply removing the person who never belonged there in the first place. A neighbor passed out bottled water. Someone else offered a blanket to a woman still shivering from stress. Small gestures replaced spectacle, and that shift felt right. The street began to feel like a neighborhood again instead of a stage for absurdity. The engine idled steadily. The hose hissed. Commands traveled efficiently from one firefighter to another. A breeze carried away the last wisps of smoke, and with them went the tension that had everyone on edge. The neighborhood exhaled together, collective nerves settling. Nobody mentioned HOA rules anymore. No one talked about curbs, zones, or compliance. Those words had lost all meaning in the face of real urgency. What mattered was that trained professionals had space to work and the situation was under control. The contrast between real authority and fake power couldn't have been clearer if it tried. As the emergency continued smoothly, confidence replaced curiosity. Neighbors trusted the process again. The danger hadn't vanished completely, but the chaos had. Order, the real kind, settled in naturally once interference was gone. She tried telling a fire truck where to park, and learned emergencies don't answer to clipboards.